How's it going? My name is Jess and this is Reasoned. In this video I'm delighted to be joined by leader of Reform UK, Richard Tice. In this video we'll be discussing the failure of the Conservative Party, borderless Britain's inability to control illegal immigration and the madness behind the net zero agenda. Let's start the conversation. To put my cards on the table, I'm a Conservative Party member. I'm from the north, I'm working class, so through my upbringing and through the education system, which is completely woke, it was already hard enough for me to come out as a Conservative Party member, as I'm sure many Red Wall voters who voted Conservative last election will relate to. And quite frankly, what was the point of that? I think they betrayed us completely. What do you think about that?
Look, it's great to be with you and thanks for having me on. And in a sense, so many people have been left bereft, disappointed and abandoned because you quite reasonably joined one of the main two political parties. You formed a view based on what you understood that they represented, and you've suddenly found that actually they're not conservative at all, Jess. They're con-socialists. I invented the word. It's become ever more relevant. Because socialism, as you know, stands for high taxes, high government spend, wasteful government spending, and lower growth leading to lower wages and ultimately less investment in public services. So we've got now two forms of socialism in the United Kingdom. We've got con-socialism, led by Sunak and Jeremy Hunt, and we've got red socialism, led by Keir Starmer, and some of which is heading almost towards communism. And then you've got Reform UK, who's the only party now that stands for high growth, cutting taxes for the lowest paid for small businesses so that you create bubble up economic growth. We stand for cutting daft, wasteful government spending, and we stand for cutting daft old EU regulation. And those are all the things that great people like yourself, and I'm sure many viewers and listeners, thought were sort of values that was represented by forms of conservatism, not just in the UK, but all over the world, frankly. And it seems to have taken a very strange course here in the UK. But the good news is that more and more people are now leaving other parties, in particular the Conservative Party. I mean, I've been talking about the fact that now some 9,000 new members have joined us since Liz Truss was ousted. And we could see daily the sort of the key thing. So when Jeremy Hunt was appointed as Chancellor, we had over 600 new members join within 24 hours. When Truss was ousted, a similar sort of number. And then when Jeremy Hunt gave his socialist budget statement, increasing everybody's taxes, giving no hope, no vision, no ambition to the nation, we had almost 700 people join within 24 hours. So we can see clearly the trends. And then when they abandoned their key Brexit pledge, which was to control our borders, both lawfully and illegal immigration, so that when the net migration number for lawful immigration was announced at 504,000 net, well over 1.1 million gross, again, we had about another 700 people join us. So that's the reason why people like our message. That's the reason why we're now, with pollsters like YouGov, we're polling either equal to or above the Lib Dems. The last YouGov poll I saw, we were actually the third largest political party in polling terms. Now, polls go up and down a bit, but the point is, from a standing start of 23, 24 months ago, we've achieved remarkable things. It took UKIP 19 years to get to 8%. It's taken Reform UK 23 months to get to 9%. So I think we're appealing to people, and we're the party on the up.
So why do you think the Conservative Party has abandoned conservatism and betrayed the British people in what their manifesto was in 2019? I mean, the Conservative Party have previously been advocating for things that Reform is currently now. You know, low immigration control, low taxes, and it's completely gone the opposite way. I would say U-turn, but I think it's their intent to completely abandon the British people. But this wasn't always the case. I've heard about how amazing it was under Thatcher, proper conviction. What's gone wrong with the Conservative Party?
You've just used that key word, Jess, which is conviction. Principles, integrity, economic philosophy, belief. And whether or not you agree or disagree with someone, and many people vehemently disagreed with Margaret Thatcher, but you knew where she stood. She argued her case. Clearly, you knew exactly where she stood, and she was a real leader. What we've now got, after 12 years of Conservatives running the country, basically, if you look back at all of the leaders, most of the cabinet members during that time, they're all people in pursuit of one thing, power. And actually, if you look at them all, what's their real abiding belief? What's their abiding, deep, strongly held philosophy, conviction? And I don't think you can find it. The only conviction they've got is the conviction of the pursuit of power. All they're left with now, after 12 years of power, is the only thing they can say is, well, oh dear, it'll be worse under Labour. Nothing could be worse than the state of the United Kingdom here at the end of 2022. I'm 58. I just about remember the late 70s, but people older than me, they say, because I've asked a lot of people in the last month, they say it's now worse than in the late 1970s. And that is a shocking, shocking indictment. And the truth is, sadly, that ordinary people, ordinary families up and down the country are worse off, are poorer, and unbelievably colder, literally colder than we've ever been before because of the cost of energy, which is totally self-inflicted. Don't buy all this nonsense that it's all because of Putin. The reason that we've got an energy crisis is that there is a pursuit in Westminster of a daft obsession with net zero that's meant that we haven't used our own energy treasure. We've got decades and decades and decades worth of oil, of gas, of shale gas, of coal. We've even got lithium. Who knew we had lithium? Hundreds of millions of pounds worth. And yet these people have decided that, oh no, we mustn't use it. We must import energy from overseas, creating even more CO2 than if we used our own. I mean, I'll give you an example. When we import shale gas, yes, from the United States that Sunak just trumpeted the other day, that creates 3 to 4 times more CO2 than if we used our own shale gas treasure under our feet. And the value of this energy under our feet that we all own, it's in the order of £3 trillion. Now, it's impossible to understand what that is, but let me try and put it down in terms of the value per household. It's about 100 grand per household in the United Kingdom. Imagine inheriting a house from a long-lost aunt, and the last thing she says to you is, oh, by the way, there's a pile of treasure under the floorboards of the house that's worth about half the mortgage of the house, or maybe a bit more. I couldn't be bothered to dig it up, so I've just left it there. I'm pretty sure the first thing you do when you inherit the house is get a nice screwdriver, lift up the floorboards carefully and cleanly, take out the treasure, pay off at least half your mortgage, and screw down the floorboards very carefully and neatly again. That's the same analogy as using the treasure under our feet. And I think, Jess, it's a matter of gross negligence that these people in Westminster are quite willingly, knowingly happy to make British citizens up and down the country poorer and colder in pursuit of this obsession with net zero. And before anybody says, oh, he's a dreadful denier, shocking, let me tell you, I've got an electric car. I'm putting thousands of solar panels on the roofs of the industrial buildings that I own, that basically pays my bills. So I'm doing more than my bit to reduce emissions. The problem with Westminster's net zero is it's the wrong bit at the wrong price in the wrong time frame, and it's decent, ordinary British families that are suffering as a consequence. So we can do things a different way. Reform UK is the only political party that has got the courage to say Westminster's net zero is the wrong bit, the wrong price. it's making people poorer, it's making people colder, and sadly, older people that are colder die early. So therefore, net zero is literally killing people earlier than they would otherwise be sadly taken from us by natural causes. And that is a serious, serious indictment of what is going on.
Yeah, I completely agree. You know, it's crazy that there's so much coverage on Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil, the climate crazies protesting the streets. But in reality, I think there's so much climate lunacy in Westminster that we don't really discuss so often. But I think whether it's, the education system, which is heavily skewed towards, saying that climate change needs to be stopped at all costs. I feel like figures like Greta Thunberg, for example, they're seen as heroic, they're seen as noble, when in reality, what has Greta actually done for the environment other than virtue signal? How do you think we can get this message across? Because so many people seem to think that, yeah, we need to protect the environment. And I think, yes, like you said, that is a very noble cause. But I don't think they see the opposite side of that and the consequences of climate extremism.
Well, look, the thing is, firstly, the important thing is to be able to have a debate and a discussion about it so that you arrive at the best solution. For example, that's how science progresses. One scientist comes up with a theory, an idea, a concept, and then other scientists challenge it and test it and push it and probe it and say, well, maybe you're on the right track, but maybe you could do it this way and a bit better and a bit better. And you gradually progress. But at least you're allowed to talk about it. There are certain things now in life where you're basically not allowed to question the status quo. You had it with lockdowns, for example, during the COVID crisis. And you've got it now with the climate debate, where essentially the vitriol that comes pouring down on one if one dares to suggest that actually there might be a better way of doing it, that actually maybe global warming, and yes, we've gone through a period of global warming over the last 150 years, but if you look at some of the more accurate data coming out, maybe it's showing that it's plateauing. Maybe some of the data shows that a lot of what you are told in the mainstream press isn't quite represented as it's told out. But the first thing is, you've got to be allowed to have a sensible debate about it. Who knew, for example, that 5 years after we were all told the Great Barrier Reef had suffered existential, permanent damage because of climate change, actually, completely the opposite's happened. That it's recovered, the coral cover has recovered to record levels. How wonderful is that? When do you hear that on the BBC or Sky or other parts of the mainstream media? Who knew that polar bear numbers in the Arctic Circle are recovering very nicely, very happily? Who knew, for example, that Arctic ice levels in the summer are within literally a couple of % of the 30-year average? So this is all encouraging, welcome, good news that we should be celebrating. Oh, but no, we're not allowed to even talk about it. You're a bad person. Well, I say the whole point of democracy is that you're allowed to debate and talk about this stuff and try and arrive at the better solution. And on reducing emissions, we should, for example, we shouldn't be banning the sale of fossil fuel cars in 2030. No. We should be saying to the combustion engine companies, automotive companies, you've made good progress in recent decades in reducing emissions. I want you to do even better and keep improving technology, reduce emissions further. Fuels, I want the fuels to be cleaner. I want the filters and things to be cleaner as well. So that's how you get progress. But sure, I love my electric car. It's an amazing piece of kit. It's quiet. I like cities to be quieter. So all of that's great, but that's called technological competition. That's a fantastic thing. So we should be encouraging that. So I'm saying, listen, I'm all for reducing emissions. I'm all for protecting the environment. But most importantly of all, I want a proper, grown-up, democratic debate about the best ways to do that, so that actually the least well off, the most vulnerable and poorest in our society, they're not saying to me when I go and knock on their door, they're not saying, Richard, I'm absolutely terrified. And this happened to me in February, where a 67-year-old couple said, Richard, I'm terrified. We've got the heating on 1 hour a day. This is A 67-year-old couple in February, freezing, and they're terrified of turning the heating on in supposedly a first world country. That's not progress, that's negligence.
Another crisis, an actual crisis that I wanted to address, is the border crisis. We let in 3/4 of asylum claimants into this country. Now, the whole rhetoric around immigration is around illegal immigration, but is it fair to call it illegal immigration when the government pretty much lets them in and encourages it by providing them quality hotel services?
Well, let's be clear, there's two types of immigration. There's lawful immigration and there's unlawful, illegal immigration. If we pick up the lawful thing, Reform UK's position has always been crystal clear. Yes, we should welcome sensible, controlled, lawful immigration to suit the economic needs of our nation, where we've got specific skill shortages until we actually train up our own citizens in those shortages. So healthcare is obviously a critical one at the moment. But all this nonsense you hear from big businesses who just want to import cheap, low-skilled labour so that they don't have to spend any extra money training people, or they don't have to pay British workers higher wages. I just think that is absolutely shocking when we've got over 5 million people in this country on out-of-work benefits. That's 1 in 8 of the working population. We should be focusing on getting so many of those people, 1, 2, 3 million of them, out of the trap of low pay and being trapped on benefits, and getting those people back into work. That would save tens and tens and tens of billions of pounds every year and be a great improvement for them, their own self-dignity and sense of achievement, and for their families and communities. So lawful immigration, if we've got a shortage and the economy is booming, fine, then you welcome people to deal with that shortage. As regards unlawful, illegal immigration, well, we were told that this government would get control of our borders, and time and again you heard from Boris Johnson and from Sunak and Priti Patel and now Suella Braverman that they're going to go on top of this, and time and again they let us down. They've got no conviction, no intention of doing this, and Reform UK is the only party that will stop illegal immigration. We will stop the boats. We've got a clear 6-point plan. Some of you may have seen the videos we've been doing on it. We've basically adopted something that we know works because it worked in Australia. And I've met some of the most senior people in the Australian Border Force who secured this. The first thing you have to do is you have to declare a national security threat. And we have got a national security threat from illegal immigration. The second thing that you've got to do is you've got to make it absolutely crystal clear that 0 people who come here illegally, and crossing the channel to land here is illegal, full stop. It's actually illegal under the UN 51 Convention. So you say 0 will be resettled here. The third thing you do is you leave the European Convention on Human Rights. We don't need lessons from anybody else about human rights. We invented them, for heaven's sake. So that's the third thing you do. The fourth thing you do is you make it quite clear that anybody that does get here will be taken to an offshore processing centre and will not be able to reside here. And that it should include all of those who've come here illegally. The next thing you do is you have a clear strategy, which you can do under existing legislation, international treaties, that our government, our Home Office have decided not to use, but all the legal options and rules and legislation is there, is you pick up safely out of the dinghies into our own border force cutters and you take back to France. You take them back to Dunkirk and Calais and you return them from where they came. The moment you do that, the whole business model of these vile people smugglers, it collapses. It's done. It's over. And the French might be a bit grumpy for a couple of weeks, as indeed people were when Australia adopted their pushback. But guess what? It works and the business model stops and the Australian stops it. So these are all the things that we can do, that we should do. And the final thing you need to do is you need to have a new Department of Immigration. The Home Office is not fit for purpose. It hasn't been for decades. I'm a real estate guy. Sometimes a building is so knackered that actually you're better to demolish it and start again. The Home Office is so knackered that you've got to take immigration out of it, build a whole new Department of Immigration, staffed by people that believe in the cause of protecting sovereign borders. We need to know who's coming in, who's going out, welcome those that we want to help our great nation progress and grow. But those who want to come here illegally, and I'm afraid there are very many, they're not welcome and they must be returned from where they came. I'm the guy that blew the lid in August that 4 in 10 people are coming across the channel were not coming from a war zone, but we're actually coming from a safe nation, a member of NATO called Albania. Now, given that you can come here on a 6-month visa that you can get in a couple of weeks on a cheap flight, and you can work here under a seasonal agricultural workers scheme, why would you come illegally on a very dangerous route, paying 10 times the price, unless actually you've got, you don't want to be discovered, or you've got illegal intent, or you've got a criminal record back in Albania where you came from? That's the reality, and that is the truth, that Albanian drugs gangs, and don't take my word, believe the National Crime Agency, they've literally taken over in a violent and brutal way our cannabis and cocaine drugs trades, and they are causing havoc and mayhem in towns and cities across the United Kingdom. They are making vast profits that they are then money laundering, not only through car washes, which was their original option, but then also now new barbers shops are popping up all over the country. People can't believe it. And when I do my Talk TV show on a Sunday morning, people say, oh, there's new shops, barbers appeared here and here. You never see any customers in them. Why? They don't want customers. They want to fill their appointment diary every day with fake appointments to launder the cash from their illegal activity. This is what's going on in our country. I'm one of the few people that's brave enough to tell it as it is, but ordinary British citizens are wondering what on earth is going on and who is going to protect them. And as far as I can see, it's only Reform UK that will.
My final question is to do with young people. There's such a strong sentiment of pessimism because realistically, we're not going to be able to afford a house in a good long time. And when we're finally working after completing a university degree, which I'd say for many of my friends was quite a pointless university degree, and the government pretty much said that was the way to employment, that was a complete lie. So now they're in a job which isn't as good as they'd like, they're not going to be able to get home, and now they've finally started working. The economy is in tatters. It's an absolute mess. Inflation is high, tax is high for those who are actually succeeding. And you have to think, what is the point of working? A lot of young people are considering moving to other countries, which is an absolute shame. And I think the Tories have completely abandoned young people, which I don't think the narrative that all young people are woke snowflakes who care about gender, like how many genders there are and all this woke madness, I don't think that's actually true. I think most young people just want to have their friends, have a family in the future, have a stable job. And the country isn't offering that, the government isn't offering that at the moment. So what do you think reform can do?
So you're absolutely right. And it's so sad to hear someone like yourself and your friends to have that feeling. Look, the first thing is that work is a great thing, and work is good for one's health. It's good for one's mental health. It's good for one's sense of achievement, of worth, of dignity. And the whole point is that when you work, you want to be able to save. You want to be able to pay a sensible rate of tax in a country that is where actually you've got small government. And that sense of aspiration, hard work and achievement is rewarded by you being able to save and, as you say, buy a house, buy a car, whatever you want to be able to do. Look, the simple answer is that I would say to you and your friends, get stuck in, get involved in politics, because if that's the ambition and agenda that you want, then at the moment you've got to get stuck in and make a difference and spread the word. That's what we want. But we as a nation, you have to grow as an economy. I was recently in Australia. They're growing at 3% a year, as they have done for the last 15, 20 years. We seem to be grateful if we grow at all, frankly, let alone at 2% or 3%. That seems like a distant dream. So you grow your way out of the crisis by cutting taxes hard, cutting daft regulation, and young people, I believe, have got to get stuck in and say, this is the way forward, and that's the party that stands for it. And you've got to have a sensible, with regard to housing, for example, if you sensibly control immigration, lawful and essentially cut out illegal immigration, then you keep building new homes, then you've got a much greater chance of being able to make housing affordable. Whereas if you've got net immigration of 500,000 a year and you're only building 100 to 150,000 new homes a year, it makes it ever harder. So all of these things are interlinked. I come from a property background, so I know the flaws in the planning system. We need to make it much easier to get planning for beautiful new homes, particularly on brownfield sites in our towns and cities. There's plenty of space without the concerns of some that you just have to concrete over England's green and pleasant land. You don't actually. What you've got to do is use existing brownfield sites much better, much faster, without reams and reams of daft planning regulation that just gets in the way without any actual meaningful benefit. So look, there's plenty of opportunity to get this done, but the country's got to be led by people who understand it, who've got a track record of achievement, who actually are convinced by it and who believe in it and go for it. And frankly, when you come across civil servants that get in your way, they've got to be said, look, this is the mandate of the British people. Either you accept that, or please go and do something else.